Why does she keep leaving food on that bench? The whisper wasn't loud, but it was loud enough. From inside the bakery, behind the steamy glass and stacks of warm morning rolls, a teenage boy pointed. She's doing it again, he said, nose pressed to the window. Leaving that paper bag like someone's watching. But no one ever came. Just the same bench, the same brown bag, the same quiet woman in a red apron placing it down every morning at 16:10. No note, no explanation. Not once in 10 days. Some called it odd, others called it sad. But for the woman who left the food, it wasn't either. It was a promise, a silent one. And on the 11th morning, when 4 military SUVs rolled to a stop in front of the bakery, that promise came back, carried by men in dress blues, bearing medals, and a letter sealed in grief. What was in that letter? And who was the man she fed? Without name, without question. Stick with us, because what happened next will stay with you long after the oven's cool. Thank you for being here. Sometimes the smallest moments carry the greatest meaning. Today's story is one of those, quiet, powerful, and worth remembering. If it touches your heart, feel free to share your thoughts in the comments. And if you'd like more stories like this, you're warmly invited to subscribe and tap the bell so you won't miss the next one. Now let's take a closer look at what really happened. Tucked at the edge of Roselake, a quiet desert town where time moved a little slower in mornings, smelled like cinnamon and sun, there stood a bakery that never needed a sign. Locals simply called it Annie's Place, and it was as much a part of the town as the weathered flag over City Hall or the squeaky bell at the post office. Every morning, just after 5,000 a.m., the lights blinked on behind the kitchen window, and by 5:30 the ovens were alive. Annie Morales, age 36, wore her red apron like a second skin. No frills, no ruffles. Just pockets deep enough for oven mitts, pens, and folded-up grocery lists scribbled on the backs of receipts. She'd lived in Roselake her whole life, had never made it more than 50 miles outside the county line. But she didn't need to. Her world existed in trays of cheddar biscuits, cinnamon swirl loaves, honey cornbread, and the crackle of yeast dough beneath her hands. And every person who walked through her door, whether they said thank you or not, left with something that came with more than butter and flour. They left with a piece of Annie's heart. The town loved her, in that unspoken, small town way. She remembered birthdays others forgot, gave free cookies to crying toddlers without needing to ask why they cried, knew who had switched to oat milk for health reasons, and who had just gone vegan to impress a girl. But it was the man on the back bench who no one else noticed. At first, Annie thought he might have been a drifter passing through, older, maybe mid-60s, with a crumpled brown jacket and the kind of boots that had walked farther than most cars ever drove. He didn't beg, didn't sleep there. Just sat, each day, 60-10 sharp, like a ritual. Back straight, hands in his lap, never looked up. Except once, when Annie accidentally dropped a tray of flour while sweeping out the patio. The crash startled her. Her hands shook, and when she looked up, the man was watching. Not unkindly, just watching. His eyes weren't lost, but rather the opposite, sharp, alert, like he noticed everything but refused to comment on any of it. The next morning, Annie brought an extra sandwich, just one leftover ham and cheddar roll wrapped in brown paper bag, a small banana muffin, and a black coffee in a to-go cup. The lid didn't quite fit right, so she pressed it down twice with the heel of her palm. She didn't hand it to him, just left it on the bench beside him and muttered, mostly to herself, "Kitchen got carried away again." He didn't say a word, but the next day he was there again. So was the bag, and again. And again. By the end of week 3, it had become their unspoken understanding. No words, no eye contact, just food, and a quiet nod. Annie never told anyone, not her manager, not her staff, not even Rosa from the flower cart 2 doors down who knew everything before it made the papers. It wasn't about charity, wasn't about pity. Truth was, Annie had been that hungry child once, not on the street, but in her own kitchen, sitting at a big table in a quiet home after cancer had taken her mother. The fridge was stocked with casseroles and, well, meaning leftovers from church people she barely knew. But what she remembered most wasn't the food. It was the silence, the ache of not being seen. So now, when she saw that man with the tired coat and the still eyes, She didn't ask where he'd come from, or why he never spoke, or why, even on the coldest mornings, he never seemed to shiver. She just left the bag. Not everyone was so quiet. On a breezy Thursday, Annie overheard whispers from the front counter. Teenagers, she figured, young enough to have loud opinions and soft chins. She's doing it again. One muttered, feeding ghosts. Another laughed. Pretty soon, the health inspector's going to think this place is a halfway house. Annie said nothing. She just kept slicing sourdough with slow, methodical care, like the loaf needed her undivided attention. A few days later, Mr. Harold Jennings, a retired school principal with a habit of sipping espresso and complaining about the world, glanced out the window and sneered. Back in my day, he muttered, men like that didn't loiter near family shops. And folks sure as hell didn't reward them for it. Annie smiled. Can I warm your muffin, Mr. Jennings? He grunted something she didn't quite catch. Only Martha, the widowed flour vendor who ran the corner cart, leaned in close one morning while picking up her usual black drip and whispered, You've got your mama's soul, Annie. I hope you know that. Annie paused, just for a breath, long enough for her chest to catch. Martha had known her mother, but then, on the 9th day, he didn't come. Annie still packed the bag, still walked it out at 6:10 a.m., still left it on the bench. The steam from the coffee lifted into the air like a little prayer. But the bench remained empty. She tried again on the 10th, and again on the 11th, empty. A napkin blew away in the wind and fluttered across the parking lot like a tiny white flag. On the 12th morning, Annie was called into the back office by Greg, the bakery's owner. His office was barely bigger than a walk-in pantry, smelled like ink toner and stale cinnamon sticks. He wasn't angry, just tired. Annie, he began gently. Customers are talking. She nodded, already knowing where this was headed. That man, the one on the bench, some people are getting uncomfortable. Think he might be, I don't know, unwell. He's never asked for anything, Annie replied. Greg rubbed his temple. Yeah, but you're giving him something every day. This isn't a soup kitchen. She could have shouted. Could have said something cutting, but she didn't. Instead, she reached into her pocket and pulled out a white envelope. Inside were bills, small ones. From her own tip jar. I pay for the food myself, she said softly. It doesn't come out of inventory. Greg didn't argue. Just keep it subtle, okay? Maybe leave it out back, if you have to. Annie nodded, but she never moved the bag. By day 14, the bench outside stood bare. People passed it without looking, or worse, looked, then rolled their eyes. Online a post circulated, taken from across the street. The photo showed Annie's brown bag, steaming coffee beside it, untouched. The caption read, Annie's Bakery feeding ghosts for good PR. The comments were worse, fake charity stunt. If you feed strays, you get more strays. How about helping real people? Annie closed her phone. Didn't respond, didn't need to. That night, after closing, she unlocked the bottom drawer of her dresser and pulled out an old, dented silver tin. Inside was a leather-bound notebook. Frayed, soft with time. Her mother's journal. She turned to the page she had memorized as a girl. Gave half my ration to a boy crying by the fence. Some said it was dangerous. But his eyes reminded me of me. No one grows poorer by sharing bread, but those who never learn to share will stay hungry in ways they'll never understand. She ran her finger over the words. And for the first time since the man vanished, Annie let the tears come, not because he was gone, but because she never knew his name, and maybe never would. It was a gray Friday morning, the kind of morning where even the sunrise seemed reluctant. Its light filtered through low clouds, turning the desert air into a quiet, misty hush. Inside the bakery, the bell above the door chimed regularly, each sound met by the rustle of jackets, the murmur of small, town gossip, and the comforting scrape of ceramic mugs on wooden tables. Annie was behind the counter, wiping down the pastry case. She moved slower than usual, not tired, just distant, as if her body was going through the motions but her heart was somewhere else. The bench out back remained empty. For 12 mornings now, untouched coffee and sandwiches had cooled in silence, only to be quietly placed in the staff fridge at closing time. Today, she hadn't even made the bag. Then came the tires. It started as a low hum, barely noticeable over the hiss of the espresso machine, but then grew louder, deeper, heavier. By the time the first matte black military SUV rounded the corner and turned into the bakery's gravel lot, half the shop had gone silent. One SUV, then two, then three, and finally a fourth, braking in perfect sync. All four doors opened simultaneously. Men in full United States Army dress blues stepped out with the kind of discipline that made people sit up straight without even realizing why. They didn't speak, didn't smile, just stood. Even the traffic on Main Street seemed to pause. Then, from the lead vehicle, a man emerged. Tall, broad-shouldered. The kind of stillness in his posture that made his uniform feel like more than fabric. It felt like armor wrapped in purpose. His face was deeply tanned, lined from decades of sun and command. His chest bore medals that gleamed even in the muted morning light. He moved forward with calm, precise steps. The bell above the bakery door rang once, sharp, clear, and final. Inside. Forks were laid down mid-bite. Conversations ended mid-sentence. The man stepped through the doorway and asked, "Is there an Annie Morales here?" Her hand froze on the pastry case. She turned slowly. "Yes," she said softly, almost too quiet to be heard. He approached with gravity. "I'm Lieutenant Colonel Daniel Rourke, United States Army Special Forces. I'm here because of a promise." From inside his uniform, he withdrew a thick, sealed envelope. Creased, slightly weathered, but protected with care. Official. Unmistakable. He held it out with both hands. "This letter," he said, "is from Ignatius Tanner. The man you brought breakfast to every morning." The name hit like a drop plate. Annie's knees weakened, and her hand reached for the counter's edge. Colonel Rourke continued. "Ignatius was the father of Sergeant Mateo Tanner, one of my best men. Mateo was killed in action 3 months ago during a mission overseas." A collective breath caught in the room. Rourke paused, his voice lowering. After his son's death, Mr. Tanner disappeared. Wouldn't answer calls. Refused help. No funeral. No paperwork. Just gone. His eyes searched Annie's. But he didn't disappear completely, did he? Silence. Pure, solid silence. Then he continued. 3 months ago, I received a handwritten letter. No return address. No details about his grief. Just a single story about a woman in a red apron who left food on a bench every morning, without asking questions. Without pity, Rourke's voice thickened. He said, "She didn't treat me like I was broken. She didn't ask me to talk. She didn't call the cops. She just gave me food, like I mattered." Annie's lip trembled. In his final letter, the colonel said, "He asked us to find you, to tell you what he couldn't, because he passed away 12 days ago from heart failure." He extended the envelope again. His last words were, "Tell her thank you. She gave me something I couldn't name, something I thought I'd lost forever, my dignity." She took the letter with both hands. It trembled against her apron, and then something happened no one expected. Colonel Rourke stepped back, straightened his shoulders, and saluted. A clean, formal, perfect military salute. Outside, through the bakery windows, all 4 military teams came to attention. Each soldier raised their right hand. Each soldier saluted Annie Morales. A woman in a red apron, holding a letter, standing behind the glass of a small-town bakery. No one moved. Not the barista, who had stopped mid-pour. Not the old man near the window, who had just realized he'd once mocked the same bag. Not the teenage boy who joked about feeding ghosts. And certainly not Annie. She didn't cry. Not then. She simply closed her eyes, pressed the letter to her chest, and stood very, very still. The way people do when they finally understand they were seen all along. The story traveled fast. Within 24 hours, someone uploaded the footage. By that Sunday, the photo of Annie standing behind the counter, eyes glistening, uniformed men saluting her through the glass, had gone viral across the country. The bakery that fed a soldier's father. One headline read, "Another, the morning ritual that saved a life." Veterans began showing up, not to be served, but to leave something behind: challenge coins, medals, letters. One man in a leather vest left his Purple Heart wrapped in cloth. A woman from Idaho sent a hand-sewn flag stitched with the words, "Never invisible." Annie hung none of it on the wall. She placed it all gently in a glass box, beneath the counter. Visitors didn't need to ask what it was. They felt it. Then, one morning, a letter appeared. Folded, scribbled in crayon, wedged between two thank you cards on the bulletin board. Dear Miss Annie, I'm Leela. Ignatius was my grandpa. We didn't know he was gone until the base called. But my grandma said he always talked about you. He said you gave him breakfast when nobody else even saw him. We found a box under his bed with every note you left, every napkin. He kept them all. Even the one with the little doodle of the coffee cup. Thank you for being kind to him. Love, Leela. Annie didn't frame it in the front window. She framed it on the inside wall, facing the dough table, where only she could see it every morning. One day, Greg walked in early. Quiet, no clipboard. In his hand was a wooden plaque. He mounted it beneath the bakery's logo without a word. It ready, bread for those who need it. No questions, no shame. The sign Greg mounted stayed. He didn't talk about it. Didn't try to justify it when the usual skeptics came in asking why a bakery now looked like a soup kitchen. When Mr. Jennings grumbled about encouraging dependency, Greg simply topped off his coffee and said, "Muffins on the house today, Harold. Try the cranberry one." But inside, the air of Annie's place had changed. Not noisily, not dramatically, just deeply. Something unspoken now passed between customers. They moved slower, said, "Thank you," more clearly. Kids stopped to look at the glass box of coins and letters by the register. Not because they understood war, but because they understood love. One rainy Wednesday, a young woman lingered at the door. Her hoodie was too big, her shoelaces untied. She looked 17, maybe 18. She didn't walk in at first. Just stood there, arms crossed tightly, like she wasn't sure if this was the kind of place you needed permission to enter. Annie, wiping down the far counter, looked up and smiled gently. "You cold out there?" The girl hesitated, then stepped inside. "My dad's deployed," she mumbled. "My mom cries a lot. I don't know, I just wanted to see F Young." She trailed off, unsure. Annie didn't press. "We always have bread," she said, already reaching for a warm roll, and coffee, and a seat, and someone to listen if you want to talk. She placed the roll gently on the table. A napkin beside it, a tiny heart doodled in the corner. Just like she used to leave for Ignatius. The girl sat, and for the first time in a while, her shoulders relaxed. That's what the place had become. Not just a bakery, not just a counter with pastries and price tags. It was now a sanctuary. For mothers whose sons had just deployed. For old men who had medals but no one to show them to. For girls who never knew their grandfathers but wanted to know what kind of man he had been. Some came not to eat, but to leave things behind. A bronze dog tag, a folded flag, a letter written in cursive on yellowed paper, unsigned. Annie didn't ask. She just added them to the glass box, gently dusting them each morning with a soft cloth, the way one might tend to an altar. One morning, Annie arrived to find a hand-carved wooden bench leaning against the bakery wall. No note, no sender. Just a simple plaque in brass, "To the man who waited," and the woman who saw him. Greg helped her bolt it in place the next day, and from that morning on, the bench out back was never empty again. Some sat for 5 minutes. Some sat for hours. Some sat in silence. Others talked to the air as if someone might still be listening, and perhaps someone was. A year later, Veterans Day arrived under a sky the color of steel. The mayor hosted the usual parade, marching band hand-lettered signs, a flyover so brief most people missed it while digging in their pockets for phones. But afterward, people didn't go to the park or to the high school gym. They came to Annie's not to buy, but to sit, to lay something down, to remember someone, or simply to whisper thank you. The line curled out the door, and no one complained. Children clutched their parents' hands. Widows brought black and white photographs in frames. Old men with trembling fingers wrote names on napkins and left them in the box. At 11:11 a.m., a hush fell over the bakery. Someone began reading aloud. It wasn't a poem or a speech. It was the letter from Ignatius Tanner. The one Annie kept taped inside her baking cabinet, folded now from where, but still clear. She gave me nothing more than bread. But it felt like a handshake from the world. Like someone had finally stopped long enough to say, "You're still here." And that still matters. Afterward, the teenage girl from before, now a high school senior, approached Annie with something clutched in her hand. A coin, challenge style. "He's home now," the girl said softly. "My dad. He wanted you to have this." Annie turned it over. Stamped in heavy lettering, Semper Fidelis, never forgotten. She nodded, slipped it into the box. Didn't ask who left it. Didn't need to. In the weeks that followed, more notes came in, not just from Roselake, but from Oregon, Wyoming, Tennessee. Veterans who had read the story online, mothers who remembered the sting of silence, even children who'd never known a war, but recognized what kindness looked like when they saw it. Some sent checks. Annie returned them all. She didn't want a foundation, didn't want a movement. She just wanted one thing, that no one hungry should sit unseen. And so, quietly, without telling anyone, she started a side project. The bench box. Each week, she packed 5 extra paper bags, just like she used to. Sandwich, muffin, hot coffee, tiny folded napkin. She dropped them off at the library steps, the hospital garden, the back porch of the retirement home, always before dawn, no name attached. But sometimes, someone left something behind in return: a marigold, a military pin, or a note that read simply, "I was hungry. I am not now. Thank you." The red apron faded over time, frayed along the seams, stained with flour and memory. But Annie kept wearing it because it wasn't a uniform, it was a promise. And one she still intended to keep. Sometimes, hunger doesn't rumble in your stomach. It curls behind your ribs when the world stops seeing you. It grows when the chair across from you stays empty too many nights in a row. It sharpens when you begin to believe that kindness is extinct. That's the kind of hunger Ignatius Tanner carried. Not for bread, but for acknowledgement. For proof that grief didn't erase his name from the map. And all it took was one woman in a red apron, someone who'd once been hungry in a different way, to meet that need with a quiet ritual. A loaf of bread, a folded napkin, and a nod. Annie Morales never asked for thanks. Not when the military saluted her. Not when strangers sent letters from thousands of miles away. Not even when a teenage girl, whose father had returned from deployment, said Annie had helped her feel less invisible. Because she wasn't doing it for applause. She was doing it because someone was sitting on a bench with nothing, and she still had something to give. That's it. No backstory required. No heroism badge handed out. Just one human seeing another, and offering what they could, quietly, daily, faithfully. If you ask her now why she kept showing up, even after he disappeared, even after the criticism, the gossip, the lonely mornings, she might say, because he mattered. Even if no one else saw it, I did. The bench outside Annie's bakery is still there. It's no longer just a bench. It's become a witness. To stories left untold. To meals that never made headlines. To kindness without fanfare. People still sit there. Some leave notes tucked under the seat. Others simply close their eyes and breathe. Veterans stop by on their way through town, not to speak, but to feel seen. And every morning, like clockwork, Annie still opens her doors at 5:30. Still wears that red apron. Still bakes with the same care as if the bread might carry someone's burdens in its crust. One morning, months later, a new face appeared at the bench, a boy, maybe 9 or 10, jeans too short, eyes too old. He didn't ask for anything. Just sat there, watching the sunrise behind the roof of the bakery. Annie walked outside with a bag and a cup. No fanfare, no questions. As she placed it beside him, he looked up and whispered, "Is this free?" She smiled softly. "It's already paid for." There are stories we tell loudly, with flags and speeches. And then there are stories we whisper through gestures, morning rituals, and folded napkins. You may never know the full weight of your kindness. But someone will. You may not save a life, but you might save a moment. And sometimes that's all it takes. Because not everyone who's hungry is starving, and not every hero needs a battlefield. Thank you for being here. If this story touched you, even just a little, I invite you to share your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever experienced a small act of kindness that meant the world? We'd love to hear it. And if you believe stories like this deserve to live on, stories that honor quiet heroism and everyday compassion, please consider subscribing and tapping the bell so you won't miss the next one. We'll be here, same bench, same time, waiting with a warm roll and a promise.